I am Elias, and I am 29 years old. 3 years ago, my own flesh and blood, my older brother, stole my wife. And if that horrifying reality was not enough to completely destroy a man, my parents actively funded their secret hotel rendezvous. While I was grinding through 2 grueling jobs, desperately trying to pay our rent, cover our bills, and keep a roof over our heads, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said I was being paranoid. She told me family protects family. She just forgot to mention that I was not the family she meant. They laughed at me behind my back, humiliating me in front of the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, acting as if my pain was just a minor inconvenience to their perfect, suburban lives. But there is one massive, life-altering detail they did not know. The mysterious billionaire investor who recently bought up all their crippling debt, the silent corporate shareholder who just initiated the foreclosure on their precious real estate, and the man who currently holds their entire financial future in the palm of his hand, is me. And right now, they are standing outside my building in the freezing rain, desperately begging my security guards for just 5 minutes with the CEO. Before I tell you exactly how I took everything from them, hit that like button if you believe karma always collects its debts. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from today in the comments section below. Now, let's go back to where this absolute nightmare started. I am standing right now on the 45th floor of my company's headquarters in downtown Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a spectacular, panoramic view of the city skyline, a view that costs more per month in commercial leasing than my parents made in an entire decade. The glass is thick, soundproof, keeping the chaos of the city completely at bay. But my eyes are not focused on the horizon or the beautiful architecture of the buildings across the river. They are locked on the street level below. The rain is coming down in aggressive, unforgiving sheets today. It is the kind of miserable, bone-chilling Midwestern downpour that soaks right through your clothes, ruins your shoes, and sinks deep into your soul. Down there on the concrete pavement, shivering under a useless, wind-battered black umbrella, is my older brother, Victor. Next to him is Clara, the woman I once stood before God and promised my life to, clutching a cheap, transparent raincoat tightly around her shoulders, her hair plastered to the sides of her face. And huddled slightly behind them, looking infinitely smaller, older, and more fragile than I have ever seen them in my entire life, are my parents, Arthur and Martha. They look pathetic. They look exactly like the kind of people who have run out of options, run out of money, and finally run out of lies to tell themselves and everyone else. They are demanding to see the owner of the massive conglomerate that just effectively ended their luxurious, fake lives. Just 5 minutes ago, the head security guard at the marble front desk in the lobby called up to my private office. His voice was hesitant, professional but clearly uncomfortable, asking if I wanted to receive the frantic, soaking wet family causing a massive scene near the elevators. They were shouting about lawsuits, about unfair business practices, demanding to speak to the boss. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looked at the blinking light on my phone, and told the guard to lock the revolving glass doors and let them wait out there in the freezing rain. Looking down at them from this incredible height, you would think I would feel a massive rush of pure, unadulterated joy. You would think I would be laughing out loud, popping open a bottle of vintage champagne, celebrating my ultimate victory over the people who threw me to the wolves. But the absolute truth is, I just feel a deep, cold emptiness inside my chest, followed quickly by a profound, heavy sense of relief. It took me 3 brutal years of absolute hell to build this grooming and fragrance empire. 3 years of blood, sweat, tears, sleepless nights, and an absolutely ruthless legal strategy to get to this exact moment in time. I did not get lucky. I orchestrated this outcome. I meticulously planned every single lawsuit, every hostile corporate acquisition, and every strategic market maneuver to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, it would completely crush the very foundation of their arrogance and their bank accounts. People ask me all the time how I became so successful so quickly in such a competitive industry. They see the tailored Italian suits, the luxury cars parked in my private garage, and the rapidly expanding business portfolio, and they naturally assume I had some massive inheritance waiting for me. They assume I had a wealthy, connected mentor who simply handed me the keys to the kingdom. They assume I was born on third base and thought I hit a triple. They do not know that my relentless drive was forged in the absolute ultimate betrayal. They do not know that my ambition is fueled by the sickening memory of my own mother handing my wife the keys to a luxury hotel room so she could sleep with my own brother. When you lose everything in the blink of an eye, your marriage, your family, your dignity, your savings, and your entire sense of reality, you only have two choices in this world. You can let the suffocating grief swallow you whole, let the dark depression become your permanent address, and fade into nothingness, living the rest of your life as a bitter, broken victim telling everyone who will listen about how unfair the world is. Or you can take all that burning rage, all that toxic waste they carelessly dumped on you, and use it as high-octane rocket fuel. I chose the latter. I chose to weaponize my heartbreak. I chose to build a fortress so high they could never touch me again. Standing here, watching the harsh rain batter their shoulders, my mind inevitably drifts back to the very beginning of my life. I realize now, with the crystal-clear, painful vision of hindsight, that the warning signs were always there, flashing right in front of my face. The blatant favoritism, the subtle, cutting digs at the dinner table, the way I was always treated like a second-class citizen in the very home I grew up in. I was born into a family that viewed me not as a beloved son, but as a backup plan. A safety net they could happily trample on whenever it suited their needs. I just stubbornly refused to see it until they forced me to look at the ugly, undeniable truth. I always thought the worst part of my life was going to be the constant financial struggles I faced growing up, constantly worrying about money, but I was so incredibly wrong. The worst part was the people I shared a Thanksgiving dinner table with. The people who smiled brightly for the holiday cameras while quietly sharpening the knife they would eventually plunge right into my back. I grew up in a very average, seemingly perfect middle-class family in the sprawling suburbs of the Midwest. From the outside looking in, we looked like the quintessential American dream. We lived in a two-story colonial house with a perfectly manicured lawn situated at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. My father, Arthur, was the president of the local HOA meetings, always shaking hands, organizing neighborhood watch programs, and playing the role of the highly responsible, upstanding civic leader. My mother, Martha, baked intricate cherry pies for the church bake sales and hosted summer barbecues. We smiled widely for the annual holiday cards, projecting an impenetrable image of total domestic bliss to our neighbors. But behind those freshly painted front doors, my family made it painfully obvious who the star of the show really was, and it was never, ever me. Victor, my older brother by 3 years, was the undeniable, untouchable golden child. He was incredibly charismatic, naturally athletic, and possessed this arrogant, easy confidence that my parents absolutely adored. I am not saying he did not have talent, but the way my parents treated him compared to me was a daily masterclass in psychological abuse and neglect. When Victor expressed a passing interest in joining an elite, highly competitive traveling hockey league, my parents signed him up without a single second thought. They bought all the top-tier, expensive gear, drove across state lines every single weekend, stayed in expensive hotels, and cheered wildly at every single game. When I, at age 12, asked to join a basic community science program because I was deeply fascinated by chemistry and how different compounds reacted with each other, my mother sighed heavily, as if my simple request was an enormous, unbearable burden on the family. She looked at me, rubbed her temples, and told me that they were stretched far too thin right now and maybe we could look into it next year. Next year came and went, and absolutely nothing happened. My childhood dreams and interests were simply collateral damage in the grand, expensive project of funding Victor's perfect life. The blatant, unapologetic favoritism hit a sickening, unforgettable peak during our teenage years. I will never, ever forget my 18th birthday as long as I live. For Victor's 18th birthday, my parents had secretly dipped heavily into their retirement savings and bought him a car. It was not just any practical, used car for a teenager. It was a used Porsche. They threw a massive, catered party, invited the whole neighborhood, rented a huge white tent for the backyard, and paraded him around like royalty. My father gave a long, tearful speech about how Victor was destined for absolute greatness. When I finally turned 18 3 years later, I did not even bother asking for a car. I already knew my place in the hierarchy. What I received was a cheap, dry sheet cake from Walmart, heavily discounted because the icing was smeared and it was a day old, and a generic greeting card that said they were proud of me. Proud of what? Surviving another year as the invisible son living in the shadow of their golden boy? But the memory that truly cemented my complete lack of worth in their eyes was a Christmas morning a few years later. My parents always went completely overboard for Victor during the holidays, buying him expensive electronic gadgets, designer clothes, and luxury sporting goods. That year, Victor tore open a custom leather briefcase imported from Italy and an incredibly expensive vintage watch. I sat there on the living room floor in my worn-out jeans and opened a small, flat cardboard box. Inside was a multi-pack of plain white socks and a $25 Target gift card. I just sat there and stared at it. I could not even formulate words. And the most insulting, deeply infuriating part? My mother looked at me with a perfectly straight face, her eyes practically daring me to complain or show ungratefulness, and said, "We spent the exact same amount on you both this year, Elias. Do not look so disappointed." Sure, Mom. The math really checks out. I did not let their emotional neglect destroy my future. I simply could not afford to. I worked my absolute hardest in high school because I genuinely felt like I had to prove my worth to the world just to justify my existence. I desperately wanted to matter to someone. I worked 2 grueling part-time jobs during college, one flipping burgers smelling constantly like stale cooking grease, and another stocking heavy boxes on warehouse shelves overnight, just to afford my tuition and my cramped apartment. My parents claimed they could not help me financially, citing the tough economy. Yet they were somehow magically managing to pay for Victor's entire MBA program and his luxurious downtown apartment. I majored in fragrance chemistry. It was my absolute passion. While Victor was out aggressively networking, playing golf, and partying on our parents' dime, I was in the university lab, learning how to isolate chemical compounds, deeply understanding how scent powerfully ties to human memory and raw emotion. I wanted to create high-end, custom grooming products and colognes for men. I wanted to build something real. During my senior year, I was working at a small, boutique fragrance shop in the city. It was not glamorous, but I was surrounded by the raw materials I loved, learning the retail trade from the ground up, barely making minimum wage. That is exactly where I met Clara. Clara walked into the shop one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was looking for a unique gift for her father. She was stunning, elegant, soft-spoken, with a warm smile that completely disarmed my usually guarded, cynical nature. I spent a full hour showing her different complex scent profiles, explaining the intricate chemistry behind the bright top notes of bergamot and the deep, lingering base notes of sandalwood and cedar. She did not just listen politely waiting to leave. She leaned in. She looked at me right in the eyes like I was the most fascinating, intelligent person in the entire world. No one had ever taken that kind of genuine, undivided interest in me before. Not my family, not anyone. We started dating almost immediately, and it felt like a massive breath of fresh air. She did not care that I was a broke college student grinding through a minimum wage job. She admired my intense ambition. She made me feel seen, validated, and respected. When I was pulling brutal all-nighters studying for organic chemistry finals, she would show up at my terrible, drafty apartment at 2 a.m. with hot takeout food and strong coffee. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was somebody's absolute priority. I felt like I finally had a real family. I proposed to her 2 years later. I meticulously saved up every single spare dime from my meager junior chemist salary, skipping meals to afford a beautiful, modest diamond ring. When I eagerly drove to my parents' house to tell them we were officially engaged, hoping for just an ounce of the joy and celebration they regularly showered on Victor for his most minor achievements, their reaction was incredibly telling and deeply painful. My mother barely looked up from her glossy interior design magazine. She took a slow sip of her expensive red wine, sighed, and said, "Well, I hope her family has money, Elias, because you certainly do not. Does she have a substantial inheritance we should know about?" My father just grunted from his recliner and turned up the volume on the television. They did not ask about the proposal. They did not ask to see a picture of the ring. They did not ask how I felt. Our wedding day should have been the happiest, most purely joyful day of my life, but Victor made absolutely sure to cast his toxic, suffocating shadow over every single moment of it. My parents acted like it was an absolute chore to even be there, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen about the modest suburban venue, the cheap floral arrangements, and the standard catering. Victor, meanwhile, showed up late in a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than my entire wedding budget. He spent the entire reception heavily drinking premium liquor, dominating every conversation, and aggressively networking with Clara's relatives, desperately trying to be the center of attention as he always did. But what really made my blood boil, what planted the very first seed of dread in my stomach, were the comments. Toward the end of the night, I was walking back from the restroom when I saw Victor corner Clara near the open bar. He was leaning in way too close, invading her personal space in a way that made my chest tighten with primal anxiety. I heard him say, his voice dripping with arrogance and condescension, "Wow, Elias really hit the jackpot, didn't he? I didn't think my little brother had it in him to land a woman like you. You could do so much better, you know?" I fully expected Clara to slap his face. I expected her to walk away in total disgust, defending her new husband. Instead, I stood frozen and watched Clara laugh. It was not a polite, uncomfortable, forced chuckle. It was a genuine, flushed, throaty laugh. She reached out and touched his arm lightly before turning away. At the time, I forcefully brushed it off. I desperately told myself it was just Victor being his usual arrogant, boundary-crossing self, and Clara was just trying to gracefully keep the peace on our wedding day. I trusted my wife implicitly. I had absolutely no idea that the foundation of my life was already rotting from the inside out. I thought the worst part of my life was firmly behind me. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm was just gathering. The first year of our marriage was good, or at least, I desperately and successfully convinced myself it was. I had proudly landed a junior chemist position at a mid-sized, reputable cosmetics company in the city. The starting salary was definitely not making us rich, but it paid the mortgage on our small townhouse, covered the utility bills, and I was finally doing exactly what I loved doing every single day. I was working long, grueling hours in the laboratory, volunteering for extra projects, trying desperately to secure a major promotion so I could comfortably start a college fund for the kids Clara and I constantly talked about having. I deeply wanted to give my future children the absolute financial security, stability, and unconditional love I never received from my own parents. But right around our second wedding anniversary, things started to significantly shift. A dark, suffocating, unexplainable tension slowly crept into our small townhouse, poisoning the air between us. It started with Victor. He began showing up completely unannounced at our place. And I do not mean dropping by for a quick beer on a Sunday afternoon to watch a football game. I mean letting himself in with a spare key mid-afternoon on regular weekdays, always dressed to the nines in his expensive designer gear, acting like he personally owned the property. Because I was working late at the lab almost every night, trying to perfect the chemical stability for a new winter fragrance line, I was not there for most of these random visits. I would come home utterly exhausted, smelling strongly of ethanol, musk, and essential oils, to find Victor sitting comfortably on my couch, drinking my expensive scotch that I saved for special occasions, with Clara sitting entirely too close to him on the cushions. They would be eating fancy takeout from expensive downtown restaurants that I knew for a fact Clara and I could not afford on my current salary. When I asked her later what he was doing there for hours, Clara would just smile dismissively, actively avoiding my eye contact, and say, "Oh, he was just in the neighborhood meeting a client and figured he'd keep me company since you're always working late. Do not be so paranoid and jealous, Elias." Then Clara herself began to drastically change. The highly supportive, down-to-earth, sensible woman I married started slowly disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized. She began complaining constantly and bitterly about our modest house, our aging used car, and my totally average income. Suddenly, out of nowhere, she was wearing brand new designer dresses and carrying authentic luxury handbags that easily cost more than my entire monthly mortgage payment. When I confronted her and asked how she afforded them without destroying our budget, she vaguely claimed she got an unexpected cash bonus at her administrative job or found a really great designer resale online. But the real, screaming red flags were the micro-interactions I actually witnessed between them. I started noticing how Clara would find absolutely any excuse to physically touch Victor. She would reach over to fix his collar, brush imaginary lint off his broad shoulder, laugh excessively and loudly at his terrible, arrogant jokes, and lean in so close to him when she spoke that the air between them felt dangerously electric and intimate. One Saturday afternoon, I was upstairs in the bedroom folding laundry when I clearly heard them down in the kitchen. Victor was telling some long, boastful story about a golf game, and Clara let out this loud, breathless, throaty laugh. It was not a normal, polite laugh. It was the exact kind of laugh a woman reserves solely for a man she is deeply, physically, and intimately attracted to. Hearing it made my stomach violently twist into knots. I tried to act like an adult and talk to her about it. I tried to be the reasonable, highly communicative modern husband. I sat her down on the bed and told her calmly that Victor's constant presence in our home was making me deeply uncomfortable, that it felt like he was aggressively crossing marital boundaries. Clara aggressively rolled her eyes at me, called me deeply insecure, immature, and told me I was intentionally trying to drive a toxic wedge between my own family. She gaslit me perfectly, making me feel like I was the crazy one for seeing what was right in front of my face. The ultimate turning point, the exact moment my entire reality permanently fractured into a million jagged, unfixable pieces, happened on a rainy Thursday in late October. I had come home early because a sudden power outage at the main laboratory canceled our afternoon chemical trials. I walked into the house, and it was dead, eerie silent. I went upstairs to our bedroom to change out of my damp work clothes. As I reached into the closet to grab a heavy sweater, I accidentally knocked over Victor's heavy, incredibly expensive wool coat, which he had conveniently and inexplicably left draped over a chair in our bedroom the night before. When the heavy coat hit the hardwood floor, a folded piece of thick, glossy paper slipped out of the inside breast pocket. I bent down and picked it up, intending to just put it back in the pocket, but my eyes automatically caught the embossed gold logo at the top of the paper. It was an itemized receipt. My heart instantly started pounding violently against my ribs, a loud, frantic rhythm in the quiet room, as I read the black print. It was a receipt for the Grand Marquis Hotel, one of the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive, and discreet boutique hotels in the entire city. The dates printed on the receipt were for the previous weekend, a specific weekend Clara explicitly told me she was going on a girls' spa wellness retreat with her younger sister, Isabella, out of state. The luxury suite was booked under Victor's name. That was bad enough. But what truly stopped my breath, what made the blood literally turn to freezing ice in my veins, was the payment method printed clearly at the bottom. The last 4 digits of the credit card printed on the receipt did not belong to Victor's corporate account. I recognized those 4 specific digits instantly, burned into my memory, because I had personally set up the online banking portal for my parents years ago to help them with their complex taxes. It was my mother's premium, high-limit credit card. I stood there frozen in my bedroom, the piece of paper trembling so violently in my hands that I could barely read the numbers anymore. The horrific, unimaginable truth began to rapidly assemble itself in my mind, piece by agonizing piece. Victor was not just sleeping with my wife. My parents were literally paying for the hotel room. I could not breathe. The walls of the bedroom felt like they were rapidly closing in on me. I grabbed my car keys, ran out of the house into the pouring rain, and drove my car straight through the city traffic to Clara's sister's apartment building. I hammered my fists on Isabella's door until she finally answered, looking annoyed. When she saw the look of absolute murder on my face, all the color instantly drained from hers. She knew. I did not yell. I did not scream. I just held up the crumpled hotel receipt, my voice deadly, terrifyingly calm, and said, "Tell me the absolute truth right now, Isabella, or I swear to God I will subpoena your phone records during the divorce discovery process and drag you into open court to testify under oath." Isabella immediately broke down, crying hysterically, sinking onto her living room couch. She confessed absolutely everything in a torrent of words. She told me Clara and Victor had been secretly sleeping together for over 8 months. They would constantly use her as a fake alibi to get away on romantic weekends. But then Isabella dropped the final, absolute crushing blow that destroyed me. She admitted, sobbing, that she had felt so incredibly guilty about the affair that she had secretly gone to my mother, Martha, about it 3 months ago, practically begging her to intervene and stop Victor from destroying my marriage. Do you know what my loving mother told Isabella? My mother told her to keep her mouth shut and mind her own business. My mother stated clearly that Victor was a highly successful man who could give Clara the luxurious life she truly deserved, and that I was just a poor chemist holding Clara back from her potential. My parents had not just turned a blind eye to the affair out of denial. They actively, aggressively, and financially supported it. I later discovered through a ruthless private investigator I hired that my parents had quietly sold a valuable piece of rural real estate they owned, specifically to pad my mother's bank account so she could seamlessly fund Victor's extravagant lifestyle and his secret hotel hookups with my wife without raising flags. They literally sold family property to finance my utter destruction. They did not protect me. They protected him. The golden child could do absolutely no wrong, even when he was repeatedly stabbing his own younger brother in the back. I drove home that night in a state of absolute, numb, paralyzing shock. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned pure white. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth physically ached. My own mother, my own father, my own brother, my own wife, every single person on this earth who was supposed to have my back, every person I deeply loved and trusted, had actively conspired to humiliate me, betray me, and ruin my life. I was entirely, completely alone in the world. But the storm was not even close to being over. They were about to systematically take the last thing I had left to my name. I did not sleep a single second that entire night. I could not bring myself to bear going inside the house, to sleep in the very bed where she had undoubtedly laid and thought of him. I sat in the pitch dark in my freezing, turned-off car, parked 2 blocks away from my own home, staring blankly at the illuminated numbers on the dashboard clock as the hours crawled by. I needed a bulletproof plan. I needed a ruthless, airtight, merciless legal strategy. I knew with absolute certainty that if I confronted them immediately in a blind, emotional rage with no actual leverage besides a printed receipt, they would instantly gaslight me. Victor would immediately hire a massive team of shark lawyers, my parents would help them hide the marital assets, and Clara would take me to the absolute cleaners in a divorce court, leaving me destitute. I needed to secure my personal finances first. I needed to keep my stable job, secure that impending promotion to director, and use the increased salary to hire the absolute best, most vicious divorce attorney in the city. I had to play this completely cold, burying my emotions deep down. The next morning, the sun came up, pale and weak. I drove to the cosmetics company headquarters, running on nothing but pure adrenaline, shattering heartbreak, and 3 cups of black coffee. I planned to go straight to HR to request an emergency advance on my salary to retain legal counsel immediately. But the universe, or rather my highly manipulative brother, had vastly different plans for me. As soon as I walked through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, before I even reached the bank of elevators, 2 large corporate security guards and a senior representative from HR intercepted me. They flanked me and escorted me directly into the corner office of my department head and boss, Julian. Julian was a guy I genuinely considered a professional mentor and a friend. We had worked closely together on countless formulas for 2 years, and he had personally, verbally promised me a major promotion to head of research and development by the end of the quarter. Julian would not even make eye contact with me. He stared firmly down at his massive mahogany desk, sliding a thick manila folder across the polished wood toward me. "Elias, we are letting you go," Julian muttered, his voice tight, robotic, and clearly rehearsed. "Effective immediately. Your severance package details are in the folder. Security will escort you to your desk to pack your personal belongings, and then you are to leave the premises." I stared at him, my mind completely short-circuiting, unable to process the words. What? Why? My performance reviews have been absolutely flawless for 2 years. I just finalized the entire chemical formula for the new winter line. It's projected to make millions. You told me I was up for director. Julian shifted extremely uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, adjusting his silk tie nervously. There have been several complaints about your general attitude and your recent mental stability. We are aggressively restructuring the department, and you just do not fit the company culture anymore. We need people who are completely focused on the work. It was a blatant, disgusting, transparent lie. It made absolutely zero sense until a few days later, when a highly sympathetic coworker from the corporate accounting department called me from a burner phone off the record. She let it slip that Victor had recently taken Julian out for an incredibly expensive steak dinner and a round of golf at his private, exclusive country club. Victor's massive logistics company was a major supplier of vital chemical raw materials to our lab. Victor had aggressively leveraged his massive corporate weight, explicitly threatening to pull a multi-million-dollar supply contract unless Julian fired me on the spot. Victor had boldly claimed I was mentally unstable, going through severe personal issues, and causing toxic drama that was a massive liability for the business. Julian, the pathetic, spineless coward that he was, gladly took the bribe, bowed to the corporate pressure, and threw me straight under the bus to save his own department's bottom line and his own bonus. Victor had not just stolen my wife. He had systematically, maliciously orchestrated the total destruction of my career so I would not have the financial resources, the salary, or the professional credibility to fight back against him in court. He wanted me completely broken, entirely destitute, and crawling on my knees begging him for scraps. I was publicly escorted out of the building by security like a common criminal in front of all my colleagues. My entire professional life unceremoniously packed into a single, pathetic cardboard box. I drove back to the townhouse, my chest incredibly tight with a cold, terrifying, unfamiliar clarity. I unlocked and walked through the front door, and there was Clara, standing right in the middle of the living room. She was zipping up a massive, expensive designer suitcase. She looked up at me, her face completely hardened, entirely void of any of the warmth, affection, or love I once foolishly believed she had for me. She looked at me like I was a disgusting stranger she had accidentally stepped on in the street. "I am leaving you, Elias," she said, her voice dripping with absolute, unapologetic disdain. "I am filing for divorce today. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. My lawyer will be contacting you regarding the custody of the assets and the house." She did not even try to hide the betrayal anymore. She knew I had been fired. She probably knew exactly what time Julian was going to hand me that manila folder. She and Victor had planned this exact, vicious sequence of events perfectly to leave me completely paralyzed, broke, and defenseless. She walked right past me, not even offering a single word of apology or explanation, dragging her expensive luggage. Luggage I now knew my own mother had paid for, and walked out the front door. Through the living room window, I watched her walk down the driveway and get into Victor's black Porsche that was idling by the curb. He didn't even look at the house. They just drove away. I stood there completely alone in the empty living room of a house I could no longer afford to pay the mortgage on, with absolutely no job, no wife, no family, and almost nothing left in my bank account. The silence of the house was absolute, heavy, and deafening. I felt like the universe had violently ripped away every single thing I had ever worked for. I was standing alone in the smoldering ashes of my own life. But as I stood there in the absolute wreckage, looking at the empty space on the floor where her bags used to be, something deep inside my soul permanently shifted. The weak, desperate Elias who constantly wanted his parents' approval died right there in that living room. The naive Elias who always wanted to play fair and be the bigger person was gone forever, incinerated by their cruelty. I walked slowly over to the kitchen counter, reached deep into my cardboard box from work, and pulled out my personal, leather-bound chemistry notebook. It was the notebook containing all my proprietary, unreleased, highly advanced formulas for men's luxury grooming products. These were the formulas Julian did not know I had smartly kept entirely off the company's internal servers. I ran my hand over the worn leather cover, feeling the weight of it, and I made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself. They thought they had buried me deep in the dirt. They thought I was a pathetic, weak loser who would just roll over, accept my defeat, and disappear quietly into poverty and obscurity. But they forgot one absolutely crucial thing about me. I was a master chemist. I knew exactly how to mix highly volatile elements to create an explosive, unstoppable reaction. I did not need a family anymore. I needed an empire, and I was going to build it brick by brick, dollar by dollar, directly on top of their absolute total ruin. The divorce process was an absolute, unmitigated bloodbath. It was a masterclass in legal cruelty, orchestrated flawlessly by the very people who shared my DNA and the woman who once swore to love me until death. Because I had absolutely no inheritance to fall back on, no wealthy parents to quietly pay my exorbitant legal fees, and no salary whatsoever thanks to Victor's malicious corporate sabotage at the cosmetics company, I was completely at their financial mercy. Clara hired the most ruthless, notoriously expensive divorce lawyer in the entire city. Her retainer was paid for, of course, entirely by my mother's premium credit card. I walked into that cold, sterile, wood-paneled courtroom representing myself because I could not even afford a basic legal consultation. I had to read dense legal textbooks at the public library just to understand the motions they were filing against me. Clara sat across the massive mahogany table in the courtroom, draped in brand-new designer clothes that my family had bought her, looking at me with a sickening mixture of manufactured pity and extreme, unapologetic disgust. Her shark of a lawyer systematically, ruthlessly stripped away absolutely everything I had ever worked for. They took the townhouse, citing my sudden lack of a stable salary and my total inability to pay the impending mortgage. They took the meager, hard-earned savings we had meticulously built in our joint account over the years. They even attempted to claim the legal rights to my personal, at-home chemistry equipment, aggressively arguing that it was joint marital property, but the judge thankfully threw that specific motion out. I walked out of that depressing courthouse on a freezing Tuesday morning with absolutely nothing to my name but the clothes on my back, my beat-up, aging sedan, and my leather-bound notebook full of proprietary chemical formulas. I was officially a ghost. I was forced to move into a tiny, windowless studio apartment in the absolute worst, most dangerous part of town. The ancient radiator heater barely worked, leaving the room freezing at night. The rusted pipes rattled loudly in the walls, and the sickening smell of stale cigarette smoke and despair was baked permanently into the peeling wallpaper. For the first 6 straight months, I survived strictly on cheap ramen noodles, tap water, and sheer, unadulterated hatred. I swallowed my pride and took a grueling, back-breaking night shift job at a massive, incredibly dangerous chemical manufacturing plant on the industrial outskirts of the city. I spent my nights physically mixing heavy drums of industrial solvents and harsh cleaning chemicals from midnight to 8 in the morning just to pay my exorbitant rent and keep the electricity turned on. But the absolute second I clocked out and dragged myself back to that terrible apartment, the real, meaningful work began. I transformed my tiny, cramped kitchen counter into a sophisticated, makeshift laboratory. I spent absolutely every single spare dime I earned from the factory on raw, high-grade essential oils, pure ethanol, and professional glass beakers. I worked until my eyes physically blurred and my calloused hands shook violently from pure exhaustion. I was not just mixing cologne in that kitchen. I was literally distilling my rage, my heartbreak, and my trauma into a tangible, physical product. I vividly remembered the exact, pretentious scent profiles of the ridiculously expensive luxury grooming products Victor used to constantly flaunt in my face to assert his dominance. I broke them down chemically in my mind, identifying their weak points, and I engineered something 10 times better. I created a scent that was vastly more complex, incredibly sophisticated, and undeniably, unapologetically masculine. I blended rich base notes of aged cedar and rare oud with sharp, commanding top notes of bergamot and vetiver. After 8 brutal months of relentless, frustrating failure and hundreds of ruined batches, I finally cracked the perfect chemical code. I created a signature scent that was absolutely, undeniably magnetic. It smelled like raw power, quiet confidence, and old money. I bottled the golden liquid in cheap glass vials I bought in bulk, printed homemade, minimalist labels at a local copy shop down the street, and called the brand Aegis, the mythical impenetrable shield. I started aggressively peddling my product to independent boutique owners, high-end barbershops, and exclusive men's lifestyle stores across the city. I was flatly rejected 99 times. People looked at my homemade packaging and literally laughed in my face, telling me to get out of their stores. But on the 100th try, a highly respected master barber in the wealthy financial district agreed to put 5 small bottles on his front counter just to get me to leave. Those 5 bottles completely sold out in 4 hours. The very next day, he frantically called me and ordered 20 more. The week after that, he demanded 100. Word of mouth spread like absolute wildfire among the city's wealthy elite. The massive, life-altering turning point came when a highly prominent, wildly successful lifestyle venture capitalist named Marcus walked into that specific barbershop for a trim. Marcus was a self-made multimillionaire who specialized exclusively in scaling niche boutique brands into massive global empires. He bought a bottle of Aegis, immediately recognized the unprecedented quality, tracked down my personal phone number, and aggressively demanded a business meeting. I walked into his massive, glass-walled corner office wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit I bought at a local thrift store. I did not give him a slick, desperate marketing pitch. I sat down, looked him dead in the eye, and gave him the raw, undeniable chemistry, the incredibly high profit margins, and the absolute superior quality of the product. Marcus was blown away. He immediately introduced me to Mr. Sterling, a quiet, incredibly ruthless billionaire investor who controlled a massive, globally recognized private equity firm. Mr. Sterling meticulously looked at my proprietary formulas, looked at the desperate, burning fire in my eyes, and wrote me a massive seed funding check that fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of my life forever. He did not just give me working capital. He gave me an entire, fully operational manufacturing plant and a global distribution network. Over the next 3 grueling but triumphant years, Aegis Grooming completely exploded. We launched a massive, full line of premium beard oils, exfoliating body washes, and luxury colognes. We got picked up by massive national retailers. We became the absolute fastest-growing men's lifestyle and grooming brand in the entire country. My face was featured in prestigious business magazines, but I always intentionally used a pseudonym for the press. I stayed entirely off all forms of social media. I wanted my massive new wealth to be entirely invisible to the people who destroyed me. I was making millions of dollars, investing heavily in prime commercial real estate, and building an impenetrable corporate fortress, all while Victor, Clara, and my parents smugly thought I was rotting away in a gutter somewhere, completely broken. And while I was steadily, relentlessly climbing to the absolute peak of the mountain, Victor was actively, arrogantly digging his own financial grave. Victor had recently inherited a very comfortable, highly lucrative regional logistics company from his wealthy father-in-law, Clara's uncle, after the man retired. But Victor was absolutely not a competent businessman. He was a spoiled, deeply arrogant golden child who firmly believed massive success was simply his divine birthright. He spent his days playing expensive rounds of golf at the exclusive country club, taking 3-hour, alcohol-fueled martini lunches with his equally arrogant friends, and aggressively micromanaging his best employees right into the ground. He completely ignored massive, fundamental shifts in the global supply chain industry. He actively alienated his biggest, most reliable corporate clients with his insufferable ego and his constant failure to deliver on time. Within 2 short years of marrying Clara, Victor's logistics company was heavily, dangerously bleeding cash. To maintain their absurdly lavish, fake lifestyle, the brand new Porsche in the driveway, the constant stream of designer clothes, the ridiculously expensive international vacations they constantly posted online to prove how perfectly happy they were, Victor started secretly taking out massive, high-interest corporate loans from predatory lenders. He recklessly leveraged the entire infrastructure of the company just to keep up appearances and fund his wife's shopping addictions. My parents, utterly, hopelessly blinded by their lifelong, delusional worship of him, actually co-signed a massive secondary loan to bail him out of a particularly bad financial quarter. They voluntarily put the deed to their beloved, pristine colonial house up as collateral. They actually genuinely believed he was just going through a temporary minor rough patch. They believed his obvious lies because they had spent 30 solid years aggressively programming themselves to believe he was utterly perfect. I watched it all happen in real time through the meticulous, highly detailed financial reports of my expensive private investigators and my elite corporate lawyers. I knew exactly how much crippling debt they were in. I knew exactly which specific banking institutions held their toxic loans. And because I now had substantially more liquid capital than I ever knew what to do with, I legally created a complex series of anonymous corporate shell companies. Slowly, methodically, and completely legally, my shell companies began quietly buying up their massive debt portfolios. I bought the commercial loans holding Victor's failing logistics company hostage. I bought the secondary mortgage on my parents' suburban house. I became their sole, anonymous, completely merciless creditor. They thought they owed money to massive, faceless banking institutions located in New York. They had absolutely no idea they owed every single red cent to the younger son they had casually thrown away like absolute garbage. The trap was fully, perfectly set. The steel jaws were wide open. All I had to do was sit back and wait for them to run out of cash, and inevitably they absolutely did. Victor missed one massive loan payment, then two, then three. The banks, acting entirely on my strict, merciless, legally binding orders, flatly refused any extensions or restructuring. We aggressively called in the entirety of the massive loans. We initiated the aggressive, rapid foreclosure process on the family real estate. We completely froze the corporate assets and the payroll accounts. We completely, totally pulled the rug out from under their fake plastic lives in a matter of 48 hours. Absolute, total panic set in. My lawyers informed me that Victor had been frantically calling the holding company's main line for 3 days straight, aggressively demanding to speak to the CEO, screaming wildly about unfair business practices, threatening a massive, ruinous lawsuit he absolutely could not afford to file. Finally, after letting him sweat in absolute terror, I told my executive secretary to grant him a formal meeting. I told her to specifically schedule it for a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I wanted them to physically feel the bitter cold. I wanted them to feel the exact same sheer, terrifying desperation I felt when Clara packed her bags and walked out of my house, leaving me with nothing. I wanted them to step right into the trap of their own blind arrogance. And they walked right into it, completely, blissfully oblivious to the absolute slaughter that was waiting for them on the 45th floor. The incredibly heavy, solid mahogany doors to my massive executive boardroom are incredibly thick, completely soundproofed to protect corporate secrets. You cannot hear a single sound from the outside hallway. I was sitting quietly at the head of the massive, 20-foot polished granite conference table, my hands folded neatly and calmly in front of me. The room was intentionally dimly lit, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows right behind me casting my dark silhouette sharply against the gray, stormy, unforgiving sky of the city. My lead corporate attorney, a brilliant, ruthless man named Harris, stood quietly by the window, securely holding a thick, black leather binder containing every single devastating financial document, every foreclosure notice, and every asset seizure order we had meticulously prepared over the last 6 months. The digital clock on the wall ticked silently to exactly 3 p.m. The intercom on my desk buzzed loudly. "Mr. Aegis." My assistant's voice came through, clear, crisp, and totally professional. "The party from the logistics firm has arrived. They are extremely agitated and demanding to enter." "Send them in," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold as the glass behind me. I heard the heavy, metallic click of the door latch. The double doors swung open, pushed forcefully and aggressively by Victor. He marched into the room first, his supposedly expensive suit deeply wrinkled and damp from the pouring rain outside. His face flushed an angry red with absolute, arrogant indignation. Clara followed right behind him, nervously clutching a wet designer handbag to her chest, looking around the incredibly opulent, intimidating boardroom with wide, fearful eyes. And then came my parents, Arthur and Martha, shuffling in slowly, looking exhausted, terrified, and completely, utterly out of their element. They did not look at me at first, because the bright light from the massive windows was directly behind me. I was just a dark, imposing figure sitting silently in the high-backed leather CEO chair. "Listen to me very carefully," Victor started shouting immediately, marching up to the table and slamming his hand down hard on the polished granite edge. "I do not care who you think you are, or what kind of illegal, predatory lending operation you are running out of this building. You cannot just illegally seize my corporate assets without a standard grace period. I am a highly respected businessman in this city. I will aggressively drag your entire holding company into a massive, highly public lawsuit that will take decades to settle. My parents' real estate is totally, completely off limits." I let him finish his pathetic rant. I let the echo of his empty, desperate threats completely die out in the massive, silent room. The heavy silence stretched out for 10 agonizing, suffocating seconds. They shifted uncomfortably, the bravado slowly draining from Victor's posture as the absolute silence crushed him. Then, I slowly leaned forward into the overhead light. I deliberately rested my elbows on the cold granite table, intertwined my fingers, and looked directly, piercingly into my older brother's eyes. "You do not have the money for a massive lawsuit, Victor," I said calmly, my voice incredibly steady, low and cold as ice. "You do not even have the money to pay for the parking meter downstairs on the street." Victor completely, totally froze. His jaw physically dropped open. All the angry, arrogant red color instantly, violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. He stumbled backward half a step, completely losing his balance, physically bumping into Clara. Clara let out a sharp, highly audible gasp, her trembling hand flying up to cover her mouth. Her eyes widened so much I thought they might actually pop out of her skull. She recognized me instantly. My mother, Martha, let out a strange, horrible choking sound, desperately grabbing my father's arm for physical support, her legs practically giving out. Arthur just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish suffocating on dry land, his brain entirely unable to process the reality sitting in front of him. "Elias?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling so violently it physically cracked in the quiet room. What are you doing sitting there? Where is the owner of the company? Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I smiled at her. It was absolutely not a happy smile. It was the terrifying, cold smile of an apex predator that had finally, successfully cornered its completely defenseless prey. "I am the owner, Mother," I said, leaning back comfortably in my expensive leather chair, savoring the absolute shock on their faces. "I am the sole owner of the holding company. I own the private equity firm that bought out your bank. Which legally means, as of 48 hours ago, I own Victor's logistics company, I own Victor's fancy Porsche, and I hold the absolute legal deed to your beautiful, pristine colonial house." "This is a joke," Victor stammered uncontrollably, shaking his head frantically side to side in total, absolute denial. "This is a massive, sick, elaborate joke. You are a broke, pathetic chemist. You got fired for being unstable. You do not have this kind of massive corporate capital." I nodded silently toward my lawyer. Harris stepped forward from the shadows of the window, calmly opening the heavy leather binder, and tossed 4 incredibly thick stacks of legally binding documents directly in front of them on the granite table. The loud slap of the paper hitting the stone echoed in the room. "These are the certified, legally binding financial transfer records," Harris said, his tone entirely clinical, completely devoid of any pity. "My client legally, properly acquired your outstanding corporate debt 3 months ago. He also legally acquired the secondary mortgage on the residential property. You are in total catastrophic default on all accounts. The foreclosure and the corporate asset seizure are entirely legal, binding, and actively being enforced by local authorities as we speak. Victor looked down at the massive stacks of papers, his hands visibly, violently shaking as he frantically flipped through the pages. He saw his own signatures. He saw the official, embossed bank seals. He saw my new legal corporate name at the top of every single page. The absolute, crushing reality of his complete, undeniable destruction finally crashed down heavily on his shoulders. "Elias, please," Clara stepped forward, stepping right in front of Victor, her voice suddenly entirely different. Gone was the absolute disdain, the cruelty, and the arrogance she showed me on the horrible day she packed her bags and left me in that empty house. Now, she sounded incredibly sweet, highly desperate, actively trying to manufacture fake tears. "You absolutely do not have to do this to us. We are family. We made mistakes, terrible, stupid mistakes, but we can fix this. We can sit down and talk like mature adults. We can work out a payment plan." I looked at her, searching my own soul, and feeling absolutely, completely nothing. No lingering anger, no residual love, just total, absolute indifference. "You made a very clear choice, Clara. You boldly chose the man with the Porsche and the expensive country club membership. But you foolishly forgot that a car is just metal, and metal eventually rusts. You backed the wrong horse, and now you have to walk." My mother violently pushed past Clara, real, terrified tears streaming rapidly down her wrinkled face. "Elias, sweetheart, my beautiful baby boy, please, you absolutely cannot take our family home. We have lived there for 30 years. All your precious childhood memories are in that house. You can severely punish Victor if you want, but do not punish your own loving parents. We love you so much." I stood up slowly, planting both of my hands firmly on the table, leaning aggressively over the granite to look my mother dead in her terrified eyes. "Childhood memories?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low, practically a growl. "You mean the precious memory of you sitting in your kitchen telling Isabella that I was a pathetic loser holding Clara back from a good life? You mean the heartwarming memory of you secretly selling your valuable rural real estate specifically to fund your favorite son's expensive hotel rooms so he could comfortably sleep with my wife behind my back? You actively, intentionally financed my absolute destruction, Mother. You handed them the knife, paid for the blade, and happily watched them stab me. Do not you dare stand in my boardroom and try to use the word love. We did not know how bad the affair was," my father suddenly yelled, desperately trying to summon some pathetic, long-lost patriarchal authority to control the situation. "You are being incredibly vindictive and cruel, Elias. Blood is thicker than water. You must forgive your family." "You are right, Arthur," I shot back instantly, calling him by his first name for the very first time in my entire life, watching him flinch at the disrespect. "Blood is much thicker. It is Messier, and it permanently stains everything it touches. You consciously chose Victor. You have always, consistently chosen Victor over me since the day I was born. So now you get to fully live with him. You get to figure out exactly how to survive in the real world when the golden child permanently loses all his gold." Victor suddenly lunged forward with a feral scream, aggressively grabbing the heavy legal documents and violently, frantically tearing them in half, throwing the shredded pieces across the pristine boardroom. "I will fight you to the bitter end," he screamed at the top of his lungs, spit flying from his mouth, his veins popping aggressively in his neck. "I will hire every single ruthless lawyer in this entire state. I will completely destroy you and your fake company." "With what money?" I asked quietly, perfectly calm. That simple question stopped him cold in his tracks. He froze, his hands still raised in the air. "Your corporate payroll accounts are entirely frozen," I explained slowly, gesturing to the heavy door. "Your personal premium credit cards are completely maxed out and deactivated. Your house is currently being padlocked by the county sheriff's department as we speak. You are completely, utterly destitute. You are exactly where you intentionally left me 3 years ago. The only difference is, I had the incredible brains and the massive drive to build a global empire out of absolutely nothing. You do not even know how to make your own cup of coffee without paying someone else to do it. I pressed the intercom button firmly on my desk. Security, we are entirely finished here. Please promptly escort these 4 individuals out of the building and off the premises. If they resist or cause a scene, immediately call the police and have them formally arrested for trespassing. As the 3 heavy, intimidating security guards walked swiftly into the room, Clara started sobbing hysterically, physically sinking to her knees on the expensive carpet, begging me. My mother was wailing loudly, aggressively grabbing my father's jacket, totally unable to stand on her own. Victor just stood there, completely paralyzed, utterly broken, staring at me like he was looking at the actual devil himself. "Get out of my building," I said firmly, turning my back to them completely and looking out the massive window at the pouring rain. "And never, ever try to contact me again." The immediate, devastating fallout from that boardroom meeting was completely absolute and shockingly fast. Once the primary domino fell, the entire fragile, debt-ridden structure of their fake lives completely disintegrated into absolute dust within days. They were physically, humiliatingly escorted out of my massive corporate lobby by security in front of hundreds of staring employees, forced to walk back out into the freezing, relentless rain with absolutely nowhere to go and no cars to drive. My legal team moved with the ruthless, flawless efficiency of a military drone strike. The bank officially, legally seized Victor's logistics company the very next morning at 8 a.m., locking the doors and beginning the process of liquidating the remaining physical assets, trucks, and warehouses to pay off the massive debts he owed my holding company. The shiny, ridiculously expensive Porsche was aggressively towed right out of his driveway by the repo men before noon, while his wealthy neighbors watched from their windows. My parents were formally, legally evicted from their beloved, pristine colonial house in the suburbs by the end of the week. The absolute humiliation of the entire neighborhood actively watching the armed sheriff enforce the foreclosure notice broke my mother completely. She instantly lost her prestigious, arrogant standing at the church bake sales and was removed from the neighborhood watch committee. She became a total, absolute social pariah overnight. They were forced to quickly pack 30 years of memories into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a cramped, depressing, poorly maintained 2-bedroom apartment in a highly dangerous neighborhood on the absolute extreme outskirts of the city. To pay the new rent and buy groceries, my father, a proud man who used to constantly boast about his massive 401k and early retirement, was forced to take a grueling, minimum-wage night shift job as a security guard at a local, drafty warehouse, aggressively patrolling freezing concrete floors on his bad knees until dawn. It was exactly like attending a continuous, agonizing public funeral for their massive egos. But the absolute most poetic, mind-blowing twist of pure, unadulterated karma, the massive secondary explosion that completely vaporized whatever tiny shred was left of Victor's fragile sanity, happened about a month after our boardroom confrontation. I was sitting quietly in my office, sipping coffee and reviewing the highly profitable quarterly sales projections for our new winter cologne line, when my private, unlisted cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the local number, but I answered it anyway. It was Isabella, Clara's younger sister. Her voice was highly frantic, totally breathless, and filled with a dark, twisted kind of amusement. "Elias," she said, her voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. "You are absolutely not going to believe what just happened an hour ago. I had to tell someone, and honestly, after everything they did to you, you deserve to know." Isabella quickly explained that during the 3 years after my incredibly messy divorce, Clara and Victor had stayed together, desperately trying to project the flawless image of a wealthy, powerful, untouchable power couple on social media. About 8 months ago, Clara had excitedly, publicly announced she was pregnant. Victor had been insufferably proud, aggressively bragging to everyone who would listen at the country club about his impending fatherhood, talking loudly about setting up a massive trust fund and college fund for his new heir. Clara had given birth to a baby boy exactly 2 weeks after my hostile corporate takeover officially stripped them of all their money and assets. The extreme, suffocating stress of losing the luxury lifestyle, the sports cars, the massive house, and the social status had caused a massive, violent fracture in their already toxic relationship. Victor, terrified, broke, and angry, violently demanded to know how they were going to afford raising a child when they could barely afford groceries. In the middle of a massive, screaming match in their tiny, newly rented apartment, Clara finally snapped under the pressure and confessed the ultimate, devastating, life-altering truth. The baby wasn't Victor's. During the last year, while Victor was busy arrogantly running his logistics company into the ground and completely ignoring her to play golf and drink with his buddies, Clara had gotten incredibly bored. She had started sleeping with her expensive, highly muscular personal trainer at the luxury gym Victor was paying thousands of dollars a month for. She had intentionally lied about the paternity, actively planning to trap Victor into funding her wealthy lifestyle forever. But now that Victor was completely broke, the new baby was nothing but a massive financial anchor dragging her down, and she maliciously threw the painful truth right in his face just to hurt him. The woman he utterly destroyed his own younger brother to steal had done the exact same horrifying thing to him. She proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was always absolute trash. Victor totally lost his mind. He physically destroyed the small apartment in a blind, feral rage, throwing furniture through the windows, resulting in the police being called by terrified neighbors. Clara immediately filed a massive, restrictive restraining order against him. The highly publicized, aggressive custody battle he had bragged about fighting for completely evaporated into thin air because a quick DNA test proved he wasn't even the biological father. He was publicly, brutally, completely humiliated. Everyone in their elite social circle found out the sordid details. The story spread like absolute wildfire. Victor was left with absolutely nothing. No logistics company, no money, no fancy cars, no wife, no child, and a totally ruined professional reputation that made it completely impossible for him to ever get a decent corporate job in the city again. The last I heard from my private investigators, he was working as a low-level, minimum-wage dispatcher for a cheap trucking company, living in a rented, filthy room in a terrible part of town, spending his nights drinking cheap beer and aggressively blaming everyone else in the entire world for his massive failures. My parents tried to desperately reach out to me a few times after the dust settled. They sent pathetic, rambling, handwritten letters to my corporate office, begging for forgiveness, talking about how families should stick together in hard times, asking for just a small cash loan to help them pay their upcoming rent. I didn't even bother to read them. I simply handed them to my assistant and told her to put them directly into the industrial shredder. They made their choice a long time ago. They chose to protect and fund their golden child. Now, they get to choke on the absolute reality of who he really is and suffer the exact same poverty they wished upon me. Walking away from the absolute wreckage of my old life, leaving them crying in that boardroom, was the most incredibly liberating, empowering feeling I have ever experienced in my entire life. I didn't look back for a single second. I didn't check up on them on social media. I established an impenetrable, titanium boundary that no one could ever cross again. The very next day, I legally dropped my father's last name entirely. I went down to the county courthouse, paid the fees, filed the extensive paperwork, and officially changed my legal last name to Aegis, the name of the company that literally saved my life. I was no longer the unwanted, unloved son of a pathetic, toxic family. I was the absolute master of my own destiny, the architect of my own future. With the massive, suffocating toxic weight of my past finally, completely severed, my life began to truly flourish in ways I never thought possible when I was sleeping in my car. The burning anger that had fueled my survival for 3 solid years slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a profound, deep, quiet sense of total peace. I didn't need to be angry anymore. I had won the war. About a year after the boardroom confrontation, I attended a massive, highly exclusive charity gala I was personally sponsoring to raise money for underprivileged youth science and chemistry programs in the city. That is where I finally met Chloe. Chloe was standing quietly by a massive, elaborate floral arrangement near the bar, looking incredibly bored by the wealthy, arrogant executives trying desperately to network around her. She wasn't wearing flashy designer clothes or ostentatious, expensive jewelry. She was an independent commercial architect, incredibly smart, sharp-witted, and wildly passionate about her career. We started talking casually about the structural integrity of the historical buildings in downtown Chicago, and I was instantly, completely captivated by her intelligence and her genuine smile. I intentionally didn't tell her about my massive wealth or my CEO title right away. For our first few weeks of dating, we just went to quiet, local coffee shops, ate at small diners, and walked through the city parks. She fell deeply in love with Elias the man, not Elias the billionaire CEO. When I finally brought her to my massive penthouse overlooking the city and explained the absolute scale of my business empire, she genuinely didn't care about the money. She cared about the intense drive, the deep passion, and the incredible resilience it took to build it from the ground up. She was the complete, total opposite of Clara in every conceivable way. She didn't want my premium credit card. She wanted my time, my respect, and my equal partnership. We are officially getting married next spring. We are actively planning a very small, incredibly private, highly secure wedding in a beautiful, secluded botanical garden outside the city. There will be absolutely no toxic relatives invited. There will be no arrogant brothers making condescending, insulting speeches at the reception. By family, I exclusively mean the family we have actively, carefully chosen. Marcus, Mr. Sterling, the loyal friends and employees who stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. I am currently spending my quiet evenings in my private home lab, meticulously custom blending a bespoke, one-of-a-kind fragrance entirely dedicated to Chloe, carefully capturing the exact, fresh scent of the rain from the day we first met. It is a beautiful scent of pure, unadulterated hope and new beginnings. We are also actively, happily talking about starting a family of our own soon. I have already set up a massive, ironclad trust fund and college fund for our future children. But vastly more importantly than the financial security, I have made a sacred, unbreakable vow to myself and to Chloe. I will never, ever treat one child differently than another. I will never make them feel like they have to constantly earn my love through academic achievements or blind obedience. I will give them the unconditional, fierce love, support, and protection that I was completely, cruelly denied by my own parents. Looking back at the absolute nightmare I survived, I realized something incredibly profound. I used to desperately, constantly wish that none of it had ever happened. I wished I had just had a normal, boring, loving family. But sitting here today, looking out at the massive city I completely conquered, holding Chloe's hand, I wouldn't change a single agonizing, painful second of it. The absolute, unforgiving cruelty of my parents and the sickening, traumatic betrayal of my brother and my wife did not destroy me like they planned. It forged me. It violently burned away every single ounce of weakness, insecurity, and naive desperation inside my soul, leaving behind nothing but unbreakable, hardened steel. They arrogantly tried to bury me deep in the dirt so Victor could shine brighter, but they didn't realize I was a seed. And from that dark dirt, I grew into a massive, towering tree that now completely blocks out their sun. Life is incredibly short, and your mental energy is far too valuable to ever waste on people who view your existence as a burden or an inconvenience. If you are sitting at a family table where your worth is constantly questioned, where you are treated like a backup plan, or where your boundaries are continually, aggressively disrespected by the people who share your blood, you need to stand up and walk away right now. You absolutely do not owe toxic people your sanity, your money, or your life just because you happen to share the same DNA. A real family protects you. They don't sell you out to fund a hotel room. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to cut ties completely to save your own life, your finances, and your sanity? Share your personal story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, aggressively protect your peace, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you are second best.